Hi, I'm Rocky Romanella, CEO and founder of 360 Management Services and the author of the book, Tighten the Lug Nuts. On today's show, we're going to talk a lot about leadership. But the leadership tip I want to talk to you about comes from Debbie Romanella. Great leadership tip, one that I use for the rest of my career and one I think that will help you throughout your career. Stay tuned for another excellent show.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Baron, founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your life, in your business, that changes everything. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to level up your leadership? Well, on this episode, we're going to take a deep dive into the truth and the lies about balanced leadership. How? Well, catch the episode and you'll find out. Remember, you can chat about this episode or any of past episodes in our Facebook group. Just go over to Facebook and look up Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. As always, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. We always need your help in staying relevant, so please get yourself over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe. Bing! To the show. When you go there, let us know. Okay, you can also catch us on traditional radio stations across the United States every Monday and Thursday. Yep, we're all the way from Las Vegas to Florida. If you are a regular listener, a big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every show. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. And by the way, you can listen to us on Google Home and Alexa by simply saying, play Dov Baron podcast. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everyone you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, someone in the C-suite, a sales leader, an entrepreneur, a leader in any capacity, every leader at some point is going to be looking for balance. But what does balance actually mean, and is it even possible? Well, stay tuned because our guest today is Rocky Romanella. Now, with more than 40 years of boots-on-the-ground leadership experience, Rocky is the founder and CEO at 360 Management Services, a management consulting firm. He has created a balanced leadership model where there is a laser focus on customer needs, employee empowerment, and the demands of the shareholders. Rocky is an experienced CEO who has led one of the largest rebranding initiatives in franchising history, the UPS store, revolutionizing the $9 billion retail shipping and business service market. He also led the integration of more than 20 acquisitions that became the UPS supply chain solutions and led its improvement, financial performance, capacity, and global network footprint. Rocky has the rare ability to see clear vision of the changing business landscape. He has the passion to develop strategies, tactics, and the matrix to drive the desired results. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome Rocky Romanella! Welcome, Rocky.
Well, thank you, my friend. That was a wonderful introduction, and thank you for leading the audience. I could use that audience participation.
It's good to have you here, mate. I'm honored to have you on. Now, your book title is strange, unless you're leading in the mechanic shop. Tighten the Lug Nuts: Principles of a Balanced Leadership. So let's start with that title. It's a strange title, Tighten Lug Nuts. Let's go there.
Well, it's interesting. The book, as it sits today, is sort of a fun read and sort of the history of some of the things that I've done over the course of my career. And Tighten the Lug Nuts is one of those such stories. And if you think about it, I was walking through an operation and I noticed that one of our vehicles had some loose lug nuts, which isn't unusual when you're driving vehicles all the time. And we were trained as part of our pre-trips to look at certain things. And so I noticed that, there's some loose lug nuts. However, the thing I was doing was going for a walk to find a supervisor to address another much bigger problem. So as I'm approaching him, I said, hey, by the way, I've got this opportunity for you. You're the person I think could fix this huge problem. But before we do that, we got some loose lug nuts over there. And so he's like, yeah, I got it. But what is the thing you got for me to do? And he's all excited because, I'm the person in charge. He's going to please me. This could be a huge career opportunity, right? And so I tell him what I need him to do. Tell him, hey, I'll come back in a few days. Well, sure enough, I come back in a few days and I asked where he's at. And they said, he's got this big problem. He's got a service call going on. So he's in the office. I go in the office and I look at him and he's all disheveled. And I said, hey, what's going on? He said, I just got a service call. The driver believes that maybe the front wheel's loose. I got to send out another vehicle. I said, wait a second. Is that the one that you and I spoke about? He goes, yeah. I said, you should have tightened the lug nuts. And the lesson there is, when you allow important things, when those lug nuts were loose the day I saw them, they were important. They became urgent when he didn't take care of them. And so in life and in business, we can only handle so many urgent things. And so tighten the lug nuts, take care of the things you can take care of when you can, so that they don't become urgent. And now the important things that become urgent just overwhelm you. So that was sort of a great little lesson, and I kind of used that throughout my career now. Hey, tighten the lug nuts, and it's funny, the kids will always say
that's a great analogy, because I think as leaders, oftentimes we are so focused on the big picture that we miss so much of what's going on. And when I have met great leaders and worked with great leaders, they're not afraid to pick up a broom or a wrench in this case, or whatever it might be, to just go, yeah, you know what? I mean, I was with a CEO the other day. We were doing a walk meeting, and we were doing a walk meeting, and he suddenly stops and he picks up some litter. Now this is a high level leader, but he stops and picks up litter in the park and walks to the next garbage can and puts it in. I didn't even notice it until he picked it up. Everybody, how many hundreds walk past it? How many hundreds walk past those lug nuts and don't bother to pay attention? But you noticed, and what a great analogy of how people miss what is important until it becomes urgent. That's a great story and a great way of understanding that very important piece.
Well, I think the other thing, you set the tone from the top. It's, what becomes important to you becomes important to everyone. And so people watch everything you do. And so I think, to your point, as you're walking and he's picking or she's picking up papers, it sets the tone that, hey, it's these details that are important. So I think you're absolutely right. You set the tone from the top as the leader.
Yeah, it's fabulous. Now, so let's go a little deeper into this, because, you have this whole thing around balanced leadership. And as I said at the opening, I think that every leader comes to a point of going, okay, we got to get this leadership balanced. But when I talk to leaders about that, it's a concept, and it's not very well laid out for most people. And most people are struggling with it. They think that, balanced leadership is the personal balance of life and home and kids and whatever it is, and balance of customers and talent and, and shareholders. You look at this in a very comprehensive way that really allows us to grasp that. So talk to us about how you see balanced leadership. What does that actually mean?
So for me, there's three key constituents in every decision that you make. You have your customers, your people, your shareholders, and stakeholders. And so to me, it's a process. So as people are discussing things, so for example, you have a new product that comes to market. And so take that as the example. Well, the salespeople, the marketing people, they've got a deck of like 400 pages, because every salesperson, marketing person's got to have at least 400 pages and a deck they're going to present to you, right? So they go through the market, the product, and why it's necessary. And so, well done. And of course, the CFO, he or she's pounding on the calculator. Well, at that price point and that margin, good product. And so at that moment, I would say, well, so far the customers represented, our shareholder stakeholders are represented, but how about our people? And so my next questions would be, okay, how about our people? What's the training they need? Do they understand why that product's important? How do we handle a service disconnect? So as I'm listening in my mind, the process is, okay, customers are represented. No one's representing our people. How do we do that? When we ask those questions, and then the shareholders are represented in the profitability and the logistics of the supply chain of it. So I always try to make sure that all three have a seat at the table through the questions that I ask.
Well, one of the things that I really noticed in your work, and I know you talk about this in your book, is this fascination, and I know you've got some great stories around this, but that most people actually don't know who the customer is. I found that a fascinating piece. Talk to us a little bit about that, because it seems like my customer would be that person, but as you point out, it's often not. So walk us through that a bit, Rocky, because that was powerful stuff.
Well, thank you, sir. Well, it really starts out with, in any process or any project they do, I always start with, who's the customer? And of course, people always give you that look and they laugh. And we were a solution in a healthcare customer, for example, when I was at UPS on the supply chain side. And so we're sitting there and I asked the question, who's the customer? And of course, everybody kind of does that smile. Yeah. Yes, the customer. No, let's talk about that. And of course, a third of the people in the room said, well, the customer is the distribution channel. A third of them said, no, the customer's the doc, right? Well, then those two look at each other and the third group says, no, it's the patient. And so if you think about it for a second, if, for example, at UPS, if we were supplying the distribution channel 99% on time is a good on time frequency. However, if we're distributing, if the customer we're solution for is the patient, you don't want to be the one patient didn't get your medication. So your message change, your KPIs change. So that answer of who the customer is starts the whole process. And oftentimes it's not the obvious. And so once you kind of weed through everyone's thoughts and opinions and you get to really who the customer is, then you begin the solution with KPIs and metrics and a solution that answers, how am I going to take care of that end customer? And so that's, to me, is that powerful question that starts with, who's the customer?
Yeah, I really like that question because you asked it from a different point of view. Because as I said, I think there's a lot of assumption about who the customer is. And I did some work years ago, like a long time ago, with a company that was a car dealership. And I said, who's the customer? And they described their customer. And I said, that's not your customer. And they said, what do you mean? I said, that's the person who signs the paper, but that's not the customer. And they said, well, who is it? I said, think about who makes the decision. And they said, I don't know. And we went away. And what we discovered, of course, is actually it was the wife. She was the actual customer. She was the one making the decision for this particular kind of vehicle because she was the one who was going to be driving the kids to school and to soccer and all that. And it never crossed their mind because the person writing the check back in those days was a man, but it wasn't the actual customer. That was going to get swayed by what she needed. And, you've done that at 3 levels, which is powerful for people to go, oh, yeah. And what I loved about it, and this is what I want you to go into a little bit, how do we sort out the priorities? Because like you talked about, if the supply chain is the customer, if the doctor is the customer, if the patient is the customer, how do we sort that out? How do we sort out where we should actually be focused?
Well, I think it starts with what are you solving for? So for example, if in this case it was end-to-consumer medications, which as you know today, much different than years ago, they go to end, they go to the patient. So now we're solving for that patient getting their medications. And it could be, for example, if you're in a franchise situation and, you're developing a new breakfast food. Okay, well, are you really solutioning this for the vendors that on your behalf, or are the franchisees, or is it the end user? So I think that starts the process. And then the last one of the questions I asked towards the end is, well, what keeps the customer up awake at night? And I think that's the other thing too, is like, what's driving this customer to want to make this change in their current operations? What's keeping them up awake at night? a lot of times we think we know that, but when you really have that sobering conversation of, well, what's keeping you up awake at night, you might find out it's something completely different. So when you kind of triangulate between what they believe the market needs, who the real customer is, and then what's keeping them up awake at night, all of a sudden you start to get to that. You start to connect the dots of, okay, this is what we're solving for, and this is why we're solving it. And then then it starts to uncover, okay, what's the solution I could build on behalf of that customer, on behalf of this organization.
Yeah. Is it possible that you understand this at a different level than most people and or most traditional leaders? Because when we chatted before we recorded months ago, one of the things that really stood out to me was I think that you understand these things at a different level than the average guy who did his MBA, because you have this unusual background that is what I would call a Jack Welch background, from being a boots on the ground guy. Talk to us a little bit about that background, because I think our listeners, our viewers are going to find that kind of fascinating, because you're a big level CEO. You've done a lot of very powerful things.
Well, for me, I mean, it started out, many years ago, as you said, over 40 years, but it started out in 1976, June 15th. I remember the day I got a job at UPS unloading trailers, and I was paying my way through college. And actually, I was going to college to be a high school history teacher and a baseball coach. And one of the things that I noticed that's always stuck with me is those leaders that made a difference were those supervisors and managers who get their people to connect the dots. And so to me, they were teachers. And so I never gave up my teaching passion. I just did it in a different classroom. It was in a work classroom. So for me, it's always that connecting the dots, because the difference between communication and education is accountability, right? I can communicate to you all the things about George Washington, but the accountability comes, did you pass the test? And it's the same in business. We can have all these great communication things, but are we executing on, to that business plan? Are we executing the strategy? So for me, it was always that, how do I look past that? And many years ago, I heard this, one of the CEOs I worked for said, hey, don't stop at the first right answer. And to me, that always stuck with me. Well, the first right answer is the right answer, but how do I move past that first right answer? So to your point, I get a right answer. I mean, when I was brought into these different companies to build solutions, they had what they thought was the right answer. I just didn't stop there. Okay, well, what are we trying to accomplish? What differentiates us from everybody else? How do we move past that? If we move past it, is there a bit deeper, wider, better answer? And sometimes, though, we come back to that's the right answer. But I was always challenged by my dad and this particular CEO. Don't move past the first right answer. Work past that. So that's where I think maybe is some of the difference, that I'm always, well, wait a second. What if we look at it a little bit different? Is there something more there? And then you come back to, well, okay, yeah, I kind of challenged it, but this is probably the good place for us to go. Or wait a second, if we do it a little different, if we engage some more of our people, whatever that, kind of aha moment is that you get, that to me is the fun part, because then now you're starting to do something creative and do something different.
So help our listeners, our viewers grasp that a little more. Let's dive a little bit deeper into past the first right answer, because everybody's rational, logical brain is going to go, it's the right answer, dude. Right? Like, what do you mean? It's the right answer. If it's the right answer, it's the right answer. Help them to grasp, how do we break past our own bias of, well, this is the right answer. Where do you want me to go?
Well, it's funny because in the book, there's a fictional character named Joe Scafone. And so how that character came about was, years ago, people would bring me an idea. And I never liked that feeling when someone brought me an idea and I'd say, well, that's a good idea, but what if this, or but this, or whatever. And so just started when I would ask the question, hey, that's a good idea, but you think Joe Scafone thinks that's a good idea? And we would all laugh and smile. And that was my way of challenging them. Hey, it's a good idea, but can you look past it a little bit? What if you did this? I felt like if I asked what if, they were thinking, he thinks, he doesn't think it's a good idea, or maybe I didn't do my homework. I didn't want them to feel like I wasn't impressed that they thought of it. I just wanted to challenge them to move past that answer, to give me their very best. And so Joe Scafone, ironically, he's the person who helped me with that. I'd be like, hey, great idea. But you think Joe Scafone thinks that's a good idea? And then it's funny because as time went on, you would actually come to a meeting and say, hey, I covered this with Joe. He thinks it's a good idea. And I'm like, all right, thanks, that's good. Maybe I could ask. So it was my way and my own personality to challenge people in a good way. I appreciate what you're doing. I'm impressed that you thought through this, but what if, and sometimes your answer is a good answer for the moment, but as you know, in business and in life, can you think past, like, where's this puck going? Where's the next spot this is going to be? Do I want to come back and have to rebuild something again? So what's the longevity piece? So you're really sometimes more challenging them. Is this a 6 month to a year solution, or can I get some sustainability, some longevity out of it? So I think that if you can kind of let them understand why you're challenging them, not because you don't think they did their homework or they didn't do a good job. I think there's more here, and you know what? I think you're the person that can get me more.
Yeah, I think it's great. One of the things I've spoken about many times is third level, fourth level, fifth level problem solving. And it is our nature to do a first level problem solving. But invariably, first level problem solving is a solution. It's not wrong, but it is first level. And invariably, if we solve a problem at a first level, we end up creating new problems. And so the analogy I've given so many times that I just think really hits home for me, because I'm a Tesla fan. I love the company and I love the electric cars and what they do. And I go, okay, so I'm a fan, right? So it's not like I'm talking them down. I'm a fan. I'm supportive of them. However, they've solved a problem in that we get less gasoline cars on the road. Fantastic. What's the next level of problem? People go, I don't know. Well, first of all, you have to plug them in. Yeah. Well, okay, great. Well, where are you plugging them into? To the power. Where does the power come from? Well, most of the power in the United States is on an old grid. The grid is very old. It's very decrepit, and you're actually burdening that grid. Oh, yeah, never thought about that. Okay. What's the next level of problem? I don't know. What powers the grid? Well, mostly coal, which actually increases coal production, increases coal. Oh my God, never thought about that. Okay, what are you charging? The battery. Where does the battery come from? I don't know. It comes from cobalt. You have a cobalt battery. Yeah. Where does that come from? Africa, mostly. Comes from many places, South America, but Africa mostly. Oh, okay, cool. Is that good? No, most of it is done through child slave labor. Now, am I a fan of Tesla? Yes. Do I encourage you to drive a Tesla? Yes, but do not assume it solved the problem. There's 5 levels of problems that we have to look at, including getting kids out of mines in South America and in Africa who are digging for cobalt, right? Including fixing a bloody system that's older than God's dog and is falling apart. So, and that's what I loved about what you were focusing on with this, about looking past the first right answer, which is so knee-jerk for leaders.
Well, I think the other thing it does for you, and as you know, some of the best plans don't come to fruition because of the unintended consequences that happen. And if you can push through that first right answer and potentially kind of go deeper and wider, as you said, you start to solve, look, you're not going to solve all the unintended consequences, but you start to identify unintended consequences that you probably would not have even thought of if you didn't push past that first right answer. And so I think you're absolutely right. You kind of push through that first right answer, you build something better, faster, smarter, but you also start to answer those unintended consequences. And I think the other thing is some of those unintended consequences are ones you can't live with, as you said, you know what I mean? To get to the point where, wait a second, this wasn't my intention. And now this violates something moral, ethically that I stand for. I got to take a step back.
So let's dive into that, because that's a really important piece. Let's talk about values, because I know you're a big values guy. You talk about that in the book, and you talk about why values matter. So let's talk about that unintended consequence that often happens. Like, this is something really great, and then there's a values conflict. Talk to us about that.
Well, I think it starts with each of us starts with 3 questions that we have to answer as individuals, and then certainly companies have to answer these same 3 questions. The first question is, who am I? Who is Rocky Romanella? And then the second question is, what do I stand for? Now, those first 2 questions, as a person, I think you can probably answer them pretty articulate them pretty well. And companies do it all the time, right? We walk around companies all over. There's value statements, mission statements. Every cafeteria you go to, you can't see the bulletin boards because they're packed with all these different things. But the third question is the one that makes a difference. So the first two are, who am I? What do I stand for? Number three is, what won't I compromise? Now think about that, because that's the one that's going to get challenged throughout your career and your business. And so what are those, what are the things that won't compromise? In manufacturing, is it safety? No matter, regardless of, where I am in the production process, if I'm behind, I'm not going to violate safety. People are going to work safely, and I care enough about them that I'd rather miss a deadline than have you work unsafe. But you have to identify and articulate that one of the things we won't compromise is safety. Is it integrity? And if you think about all these companies that have gotten themselves in trouble, and I know, and your audience knows that if we walked around their cafeterias, we'd see mission statements, we'd see value statements, we would see all the, what do I stand for? The question is, what are the things you won't compromise? And I think that's the key critical piece of it. And I think that people really need to understand that and articulate it as the leaders walk the talk. And I think the mistake that the leaders make is they silently sanction bad behavior. For example, if I see a driver that doesn't have a seatbelt on, I've got to stop and say, hey, thanks for all you do on behalf of our company. Please put your seatbelt on. Need you to come home, need you to go home every day and see your family. Now, is it easier sometimes to look the other way? Sure, but the minute I silently sanction bad behavior, then it now becomes okay to do, because people say, well, Rocky saw me do it. He didn't say anything. So I think, you look at a number, and yesterday the number was X, today it's Y, just because you pounded the desk. Well, I know they gave you the answer you wanted to hear, but it doesn't seem logical that they could get there that fast. Ask the right question then. Right. Because we as leaders have a chance to protect our people. If you think about all these organizations that had some, issue or some, major scandal, somewhere along the line, somebody could have raised their hand and said, hey, wait a second, this doesn't feel right, this doesn't look right.
Absolutely.
Instead, who's the casualty? Some poor frontline supervisor, manager, some bank teller, some engineer way down in the chain. They were trying to please you. I mean, they put themselves. So how you ask the right questions, how you intuitively get a sense of what's going inside your organization, not only is the right thing to do to protect the company, but it also protects your people, because you ask those questions before they can get themselves into much trouble.
Yeah, I fully agree with you that so often what do you call it, silent sanctioning happens. And I think because it's easier, and easy is never the answer. And, one of the things that I love to talk about is what's non-negotiable, and this is what you're talking about here. And I love it, is that I think that leaders are often one of two things. They're either lazy or they're very busy. And even if they're lazy, they'll usually say they're too busy. But the truth of the matter is that we can't be lazy about our values. We can't be lazy about what is non-negotiable. I think you made a great point when you said that in every one of those companies that have all sort of flown, the feces has hit the fan on, whether it's Exxon or whatever it's been, we all know somebody should have put their hand up. I'm fascinated by that. I'm always fascinated by why nobody put their hand up. Isn't that just bizarre to you in the context of what you're talking about?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it comes down to two things. Either I think it starts with you as the leader accepting bad news. I think all too often we as leaders, we don't accept bad news, or we set the tone that, hey, I want to hear good news, right? So if I'm not the person that's willing to accept bad news or ask questions, when things are going well, just to make sure I'm protecting everybody in a polite, positive way, well, then people realize, well, he don't want to hear it anyway, or she doesn't want to hear it anyway. So I think it starts with you as the leader being willing to accept bad news. And I think that's very important. And then the other thing is I think that, as an employee, you have to feel like, I think the balance is that my values, I tell people all the time, I was at UPS for 36 years. I didn't agree with everything that happened at UPS. I didn't disagree enough to leave, because I never felt my values or my ethics were challenged. I always felt like I fit. And when you're inside a company, I think that's one of the things, you're not going to agree with everything. Not everything's going to be a perfect day, but I didn't disagree enough to leave. And it's the same, people should go through that in their minds. Do I fit? UPS never asked me to break a law, violate a policy. I fit. Now, and I think that's so important because if you don't fit, you're just going to compromise yourself and you're never going to feel good about yourself. So I think it starts with the leader, being open and honest and setting the tone from the top and saying, look, I understand there's going to be bad things that happen. Tell me about it. I'd rather you tell me about it than not tell me about it. And do you accept bad news? And then how do you foster that inside an organization that you want people to be willing to come in, knock on the door and say to you in the appropriate way, hey, I know this is what you think is going on, but let me tell you what's really going on. And I think it's going to save you and them from a lot more aggravation.
I think that right there is a profoundly important point that so many leaders don't do, which is embrace accepting bad news. Because we hear it all the time. Well, we didn't know. Nobody told us. Well, first of all, if nobody told you, that's not their problem. You didn't make it safe for them to tell you as a leader. And I love that you're bringing this up. I actually really appreciate that you're bringing this up, that we actually have to step forward and get clear about saying, I want, because you're absolutely right. We want to be positive here. We want to be the positive company, and we're rah, and oh, great. And no, tell me the bad news. What is the bad news? What is the bullshit that I'm eating thinking that it's a peanut butter sandwich when everybody's feeding it to me because that's what they think I want, instead of telling me, hey, the lug nuts are off, dude, right? And nobody's noticing. I think that's like, I love that. As a leader, I would think for me, that's one of the great highlights of this interview, although you've covered some great stuff, is like, as a leader, embrace and encourage people coming to you with bad news, not being bitching and moaning and complaining, but actually coming to you and saying, here's where it's starting to veer off the rails because it's this much that takes us to the wrong destination. And I just love that. Thank you. Appreciate that very much.
Well, thank you. I also think, you asked me a question before that I'm not sure I quite answered it fully. And I think this is a good spot to finish it. And that's that question of, how I started. Well, for me, one of the things that happened at UPS is that we all had to drive. And so to me, that was such a valuable lesson. I was a driver in New Jersey. And so I learned the job. But what it taught me was that in all new jobs I took on, the first thing I did was to go start at the bottom and try to understand what's going on here. So for example, when we purchased mailboxes, et cetera, and then it became a direct report to me, one of the first things I did was go spend a day in the store. Mm-hmm. Now, do I have the expertise? Absolutely not. But I want to understand the point of sale system. I want to understand what happens day to day inside a store. Take over a supply chain side of UPS. I'm out there picking orders. How do the orders drop? How do you pick the orders? What happens? To me, it does a couple things. Number one is it shows the respect that you have for your people, that you're willing to take time out of your busy day to get out there and understand what is it they do on behalf of our organization. That's number one. But number two is you could ask more logical questions, right? Because when things aren't going well, you think to yourself, wait a second, that's not what I saw when I was in the store, or right. That's not what happened when I was in the warehouse, or that's not. So I think it allows you to ask better questions, and therefore you can't hide behind, well, I didn't know, I didn't realize that. I always kind of joke about the undercover boss. I could never be on that show. It would break my heart that nobody knew who I was. And I was so far removed that, people were running around. Look what I found out here. Look what I found out here. I don't think that's a good thing. I want to be here. Everybody knows my name, right? I don't want to be, and I have nothing against the show. And I know people enjoy it. And God bless all those people who've done it. For me personally, I would rather be the person walking around. Now, what's the problem when you walk around? When you walk around, you find problems that you have to address. Mm-hmm. So people don't leave their office because there's no problems there.
That's very true. It's very true. Yeah, right? If I stay in my office, everything's great.
Oh, well, when they see you walking around, that's when they get the sense of, well, I saw that person, and they seemed polite. They said hello to me. We were joking. They probably want to know what's really going on, right? So they get the sense of, by seeing you and the way you conduct yourself, that I probably could let them know that there's a bigger problem here than anybody's probably told him. So it fosters that openness that, now look, I understand there's change in communication, there's lines of authority. I got all that stuff. But at the end of the day, when you think about these companies that have spent years building their brand and how quickly that brand is now in a place where it's going to take years and millions of dollars to get it back. I bet you they wish somebody would have told me that's what really was going on. Well, present yourself that you want to know.
Yeah. But like I said, you started out at the bottom. You didn't start out as a C-suite individual. I mean, you were, and do you think that that's what makes the difference? Do you think that that's what's made you such a different leader who's focused on tightening the lug nuts as well as taking something into the multi-billion-dollar organization level?
Well, I think so. And I also think I was very fortunate. I had a dad who came from Italy that, taught me a couple of things, taught me many things, but a couple that stuck with me throughout my career. I mean, the first thing he told me was, look, whatever they ask you to do, say yes and thank you. And then he told me, learn your job and learn some more. And so that always stuck with me. He was just always saying to me, the day you think you understand everything is the day you understand nothing, right? That, the place is passing you by. And so I never ever thought I made it. I never ever thought, I was better than anybody else. I always thought, look, I was fortunate there, but for the grace of God, who knows where I would have been. So so for me, it's never about making it as much as, earning it. And so, and look, I think about it from a team perspective. No one's more important in your organization than that frontline person who's interacting with your customers. The brand isn't you as CEO. The brand is that individual who represents your company day to day and executes the brand promise. It's not about you, it's about them. And the minute you think you, because you're writing books or you're on TV or you're on some business show, well, that's wonderful. You're promoting the company, but don't let it get to your head. It's not about you. It's about that individual who just executed your brand to that customer, and they better have done it consistently and to the brand promise. That's the most important person. It's not you. Don't get too hung up on you.
Well, talking about getting hung up on you, you talk about legacy. This is for me, is an important subject. I think there's, we've got legacy in the context of succession, who is stepping into the lead next. And then there's the legacy of the actual brand and where that goes and how. Talk to us about legacy from your point of view. What does it mean to you?
So for me, legacy, so that's really ultimately your evaluation as a leader. What's your legacy? And for me, legacy comes down to, do you leave things a little bit better than you found them? Are people better because of their time with you? Are your customers better because of their interaction with your company? And are your shareholders, stakeholders, are they in a better place because you were the person running that organization? So for me, that's what legacy is all about. And if you think about it from that perspective, I know sometimes people get hung up on this title of leader. See, for me, we're all leaders at one time or another. And I'll give you my quick example, which is, we think it's a CEO, a manager, a supervisor, someone with that title. If you and I were at a conference and I asked the conference, hey, who's your state senator or who's your representative? Most people couldn't answer that question. But if I said to them, who's that teacher that made a difference in your life? Everybody stops, tilts their head. 5th grade, Mrs. So-and-so. 6th grade, Mrs. So-and-so. So all of us have that teacher who made a difference in our life. That's legacy. So by that extent, they're leaders. Yeah. They make things a little better for us. We're better because of the time with them. And if you think about that from your perspective as a leader, well, are people better because of the time with Rocky Romanella? Are the customers better because their packages or their services we were handling? And so for me, that's what legacy is all about. And can you teach that through your actions? Do people see that in the way you conduct yourself and how you go about doing your day-to-day routines and how you build longer-term strategies? Is it about that legacy? So for me, legacy is such a key concept.
Yeah, I think we can get very caught in what's going on in the emergencies, and we don't stop to build those foundational pieces of what are the values, what's non-negotiable, and what is the legacy. And I think this is the other thing with problem with legacy is we tend to think about legacy as what is the legacy I want to leave. And I think we need to bring it into the present tense and say, what is the legacy I'm leaving in this moment of talking to that driver, to that frontline person, to that salesperson, to that C-suite member, to that manager, to whoever it was. What is the legacy of this conversation? And make it make legacy way closer. I think the problem with legacy is we oftentimes make it so far out that it gives us permission to say, well, it doesn't really matter because overall my legacy is good. Well, your legacy is in this moment.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And it also, if you think about it, the way you just articulated, and maybe I'll add one more piece that can kind of maybe tie together, it's your brand. Right, so
Exactly.
if you think about a product and what that product stands for, people could articulate it pretty well. Well, it's really the same with you as a leader, your legacy, what's your brand? So for example, if I called another guest and said, hey, I'm going to be on your show, they would say, make sure you're prepared, make sure you're interactive. Hey, make sure you're conversational. This isn't about being, kind of a stiff sitting on sitting on an interview. So that's your legacy. You want a conversational, dialogue. You want to, you want to kind of move past that first right answer or first, the obvious question. So that's your legacy. You're a very thoughtful host. You think through things. You do your homework on your guest so that the guest feels more comfortable. Well, that's your legacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what a leader. What's your legacy? If you said, hey, I just got a job and I'm working for Rocky Romanella, and you call 3 people who worked for me before, they would tell you, you got to have high energy, bring enthusiasm. We're going to be hard. We're going to work hard. We're going to have some fun, but we're going to work hard. It's all, we don't compromise integrity and safety. You work safely every day, and you do what you say what you do kind of idea. Well, if that's my brand, there's other people that will articulate it the way a customer could articulate the brands of particular products. Well, that's your legacy. It's your brand.
Yeah.
And when you damage your brand in the marketplace, it's hard to come back from. When you damage your brand as a leader, it's hard to come back from that.
Yeah, as one of my teachers said years ago, integrity is like virginity. You can only lose it once.
Wow.
I mean, it's graphic, but it's like, that's important, right? It's like, oh, I do not want to mess with this. I mean, I need to really keep my integrity here. So that's really cool. You and I are in the same age bracket. Leadership is different than it was when we started out. It may have been more old school. There's a change in leadership and the change in style of leadership and the change in what is needed in leadership. And invariably, when we're brought into a leadership school of thinking, we adopt that naturally. And then we realize that things have to change. What was a turning point for you in your leadership, in your business philosophy?
Well, it was interesting because my epiphany came about one day. We were in a meeting and we were discussing improving this process. And, the 3 or 4 or 5 people in the room, I can't remember the exact number, but we were improving this process and everybody had these wonderful thoughts and ideas of how to improve the process. But it struck me that we were improving this process internally. And I remember asking the question, well, okay, this is how we think we're going to improve the process, but do you think the customer will be happy with that improvement? And they kind of looked at me and they said, well, we don't know. Well, if we're improving a frequency from 1 in 5 to 1 in 10, but the customer's expectation is 1 in 20, we're high-fiving ourselves, but we're missing their expectations. And so,
Right.
and then I said to them, well, let me ask you a question. How about our people? How are we going to communicate to them? Are they going to get a sense of why we're trying to accomplish this? Some of them may think the 1 in 5 we're doing is good. And we're sitting there thinking, we're going to send them a warning letter. They're waiting for a quality letter. Well, where's that disconnect? Are we sure our people understand what we're trying to accomplish? And oh, by the way, do we know what it's going to cost us to make this improvement? I clearly understand we have to make it, but what's it going to cost for us to do it? And so that to me was my epiphany. It's funny, out of that epiphany came my question that I ask everybody at the end of my, think like a customer, feel like a valued individual, act like an owner. So once I go through those 3 steps that we talked about before, the last question I always ask somebody is, okay, if this was your candy store, if you were writing this out of your personal checking account to do this, would you do it? And I got to tell you, 20% of the times people say no.
Right.
And I say, well, wait a minute. You asking me to do this. You think this is a good idea. I asked you if you were going to do this, if this was your company, you owned 100%, your candy store, you're telling me you wouldn't do it. I don't understand. Well, you told me to come up with a new product. We got to drive some new revenue. We've got to do different things. I just brought you what I thought was a good idea, but I wouldn't do it because it's got this problem or that problem. And so from that point, well, I'm not going to do it if you wouldn't do it, right? But what you do is, in the 80% of the times that people say, yeah, I would do it, well, now they're bought in. Now they're vested. Hey, if this was your candy store, you'd write the check. So in my epiphany came that last question of, so is the customer, people, share owners, but then the fourth piece was the question, hey, if this was your candy store, would you do it? And I got to tell you it's been enlightening to see how people answer that.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's actually very insightful. Leadership requires courage. What's been the most difficult leadership decision that you've had to make?
Well, it's always, someone has to leave the organization, whether it's a right-sizing situation, whether it could be a termination, and it's a termination that should happen. But even in a termination that should happen, you always think through the fact that they're part of some family. They're going to have to go home and tell their family that they no longer work for this company. And so for me, the termination of an individual or somebody quitting, someone leaving your organization, and even though they may be leaving because it's the best thing for them and you always have to take a step back and say, what could I have done better? What could I have done differently? Could we have found a way to kind of touch them in a way that maybe gets a change in their behavior or a change in what they're doing? Could I have seen something sooner in the process that I could have, kind of had that, moment where you walk them around the building and say, hey, come here, we got to talk. I mean, this isn't the right approach. This isn't the right way to do it. So if you could find those ways. So for me, it's always, someone leaving the organization and, could we have done something different? It's always that individual that turns over or that person that doesn't match your organization, or you couldn't find a way to make them kind of improve themselves or move forward.
Is there a specific one that stands out for you, Rocky? That was a really difficult decision for you?
Yeah, I think the ones that you get close to people and I think it always comes down to you see more in them than they see in themselves. You want more for them than they actually want in themselves. And what happens is you begin to convince them that, you can do this, and the reality is as a leader, you have to believe in your people until they're ready to believe in themselves. I fully believe in that. And because UPS believed in me way in advance that I was ready, but so they were there for me. And then there comes that break-even point where your skills, your confidence kind of is in that break-even point. And then when you're really doing well, you got to step back as a leader and let them fly. You become the cheerleader. But there are those instances when you believe so much in that individual and you see so much more in them, you can't want it for people more than they want it for themselves. And then what ends up happening is you take a good person who is successful at that level, they take that next step because they don't want to let you down. And then what happens is they leave. And then you not only put a person in harm's way unintentionally, but they left and you lost a good employee. So that's probably the ones that always bother me the most, is that we had good intentions, our hearts were in the right place, but we wanted more for them than they wanted for themselves.
Yeah, that's always a challenge. You a dad?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Four grown kids and a fifth grandchild on the way.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
What is the dream you hold as a father for your children?
So I want them to be good people, take care of each other. And the thing that I'm very blessed with is that the three of them are married, and the three families all get along. My son-in-laws get along great with each other. My daughter-in-law, you couldn't have designed a nicer daughter-in-law, a better daughter-in-law. My son-in-law is the same thing. So for me, it's the interaction that they have with each other, that they treat each other well, and that they respect each other, they respect each other's families. And for me, that's always the joy. And of course, I'm blessed with a great wife. We moved 9 times with UPS across the country. And so through those and they moved us all the kids with us. And so Debbie did a fantastic job. She's a marvelous person. And I'll tell you if we get to it, but my best leadership tip comes from my wife.
What's that?
So we went out to dinner one night and we met this couple, and we're at dinner with the couple, and the other wife says to Debbie, hey, so who's your favorite kid? So Debbie looks at him and says, I don't have any favorites. And I'm thinking, well, that's the first time I ever heard that question. I want to just take a step back and I want to see how she answers this. So she goes, I don't have a favorite. They're all my favorite. She goes, oh, come on. One of them has to be your favorite. There's 2 girls, 2 boys. It's a Jean Marie Nicole, Rocky, Andrew. She goes, no, they're all my favorites. And so then she said something that has stuck with me forever. It was so thoughtful and so insightful. And I've managed to this for the rest of my career. She said, you know what? Each of them gets what they need when they need it. And I thought about that. Each of them gets what they need when they need it. So therefore, they always feel like the favorite because they're getting what they need when they need it. And from that moment forward, that's how I manage. If I have a seasoned CFO, he doesn't need me or she doesn't need me to overmanage him. She needs me or he needs me to let them run, give them the authority that goes with the responsibility. That's what they need. If I have a new director of sales that's brand new and they don't maybe have the confidence, they need my time and effort. They need me to help them out, maybe go close a deal with them. But then once they get that, what they need is not me overmanaging them. So from that moment forward, I manage with this thought that everybody gets what they need when they need it, and therefore they all feel like my favorites. But that to me was such a thoughtful, insightful, and this says so much about who she is. But from that moment forward, I've used that throughout my career managing, and of course that's how she's managed our family.
But that, again, that's powerful, and I'll tell you why I think that's powerful. Because there's, particularly in this time, in this day and age in leadership, there's a lot of talk around fair versus equal. And I think there's a great deal of difference between those two things. I don't want to be treated equal to anybody else. I'm not the same as anybody else. My employees are not the same as each other. My kids are not the same as each other. I also, I have 3 kids and 4 grandkids. I get it. But I want to treat them in a way that's fair, not by my judgment, based on what they need. The time I spend with Ben, he doesn't want the same things as the same things I would spend time with Jake. Kendall doesn't want the same things as Jane wants. I mean, each of the, you're absolutely right. And what a great way to get that lesson about leadership. That is so awesome. Please give our gratitude to your bride from us. So as we come towards the end here, one of the things I like to ask leaders, because I think that it's very easy for people to look at us and say, oh, you're that, but I'll never be that. And I always say that leadership is an evolution. It's a constant growth process. So as a leader who is committed to growth, and as successful as you are, what's one of the things that you are personally still working on in yourself to be better?
Oh, I always work on trying to be a much better listener, because, I think that one of the issues that we all have is that we cannot allow our strength to become a weakness. So one of my strengths is I'm high energy, I'm energetic, I can connect dots quickly. Well, what's my weaknesses? I'm high energy, I'm energetic, I connect dots quickly. So what happens is I get to a spot and I'm all excited. Hey, I got it, let's go. And they're like, wait a second, I got more here yet. So I really have to work at being a good leader, listener, because that makes you a better leader. And so for me, it's always biting my lip and saying, okay, let them finish the sentence or get through it. And in many cases, I'm in agreement with them and I'm their biggest fan, but you know what? They did a lot of work to get there. So why not allow them the time and your energy and your patience to listen through it, because they want you to know they put a lot into it. And so for me, it's always about that being a better listener. And I think that's so important in whatever you do. As a grandparent, the grandkids are so excited when they see you. They got so much to tell you. You gotta, and you're excited. You want to hug them. You want to do what they want to do, but you got to let them get it out, right? So
exactly. Yeah. What brings you joy, Rocky?
Nothing brings me more joy than seeing people connect the dots. And maybe that's the teacher in me. When people connect dots and I see that light bulb go off, no matter who it is, it's for me. It's just, I love it. And I just love it when people connect the dots. They feel good about themselves, and you kind of walk away feeling good about yourself that you helped them connect those dots. So that's my greatest joy. Fabulous.
What's a guilty pleasure?
The guilty pleasure for me, it's funny, it's pretzels. I just love pretzels. I mean,
really?
Yeah. You name one, I'm dipping them in. Yeah, that's kind of my, that's my deal. I'm always eating pretzels.
It's always interesting to find out what leaders' guilty pleasures are. It's like, Oh yeah, I'm just gonna sneak away and get a bag of pretzels.
Oh, I have it in my office. People would walk in, I would be having a pretzel rod. They're like, I didn't know you smoked. Wait, it's a pretzel. Yeah, well,
That's cool. That's cool. So as we finish up, let me ask you, we've covered some great stuff here. I mean, this has been very insightful indeed, and I'm really grateful to have you on. So please share with our listeners, if you could just give them one piece of practical advice, something that they could go away and put into action right away, what would be that practical advice?
I think the first thing to do is, I think you got to take a moment in the confines of your own heart and conscience and really answer those three questions. Who am I? What do I stand for? And what are the things I won't compromise? Because that's your brand and that's who you are. And you're going to get challenged with that along the way. And so you really need to have that inventory. And maybe you've done it without realizing it, but articulating it to yourself and really kind of defining it, I think, means so much, because everything from that moment forward will be the things you do and how you do them and the processes you take to accomplish the things that you want to accomplish. But when you get that moment of challenge on number 3, what won't you compromise? You're going to clearly understand, you know what, this isn't the road I want to go down. This isn't who I am. And I've got to look in the mirror and answer to myself. And so I've got to be able to answer that question faithfully, that I did the things that I believed in, and I am who I am. So I think that would be something I think everybody has to do, is take that inventory, and you've got to be true to yourself.
So walk them through them again, because I want people to actually write them down and ask the questions. Question 1.
So who am I?
Yep. And that is not your name. Let's be clear. That's not what Rocky's asking you. It's not your name. It's not even your job title.
Yeah, it's who am I as a person? What are the, then who am I? What do I stand for? What are the things I stand for? Is it hard work? Is it integrity? Those are the things that I stand for, right? Those are the things that are the base of who I am. It's what my dad used to always say. It's what you do when no one's watching that counts.
Exactly.
And I used to say to him, hey, Dad, that's the best part. You just ruined it. No one's watching. He go, nah, there's always 2 people watching, the man upstairs and the guy in the mirror. So who am I and what do I stand for? And then the last thing is, what won't I compromise? Is it your integrity? Is it your ethics? I'm never going to look, I could have an employee that I'm not getting along with and they really are driving me crazy, but I'm always going to treat people with dignity and respect. I'm never going to compromise that. I'm going to treat you well. Even though you may be screaming at me, even though you and I may not be having a good conversation right now, I am not going to allow you to drag me down into that, because I won't compromise that. We're going to disagree, but never be disagreeable. Those are the kinds of things that you've got to be able to articulate to yourself and kind of map that out, because you're going to get challenged on those things. And then you're going to feel terrible once you violated them, because you can't get it back.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. I highly encourage people to do that. Rocky, this has been a pleasure and an honor, sir. I'm deeply grateful. Thank you. Please tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find out more about you and all the wonderful resources you have, including your new book.
Well, thank you, sir. And I got to tell you, I thoroughly enjoyed it as well. And so you can find me at www. It's the number 3 and then the word 60managementservices.com. Very interactive website. If you send me emails or contact me, I respond to them back personally. It's Rocky, R-O-C-K-Y, Romanella, R-O-M-A-N-E-L-L-A @gmail.com. I will respond. You can email me that way. The book is on Amazon, 5-star Amazon book right now. So I'm it's very humbling to see that. I appreciate all the wonderful, responses I've gotten. And so that's been fun, in Amazon.com. So we're really on internet right now. I was self-published. So you have to find me on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. I am doing book signings. So if you get a chance, I'm going to be in Virginia in a few weeks. So I enjoy the book signing. It really gets me a chance to see people, meet people, and talk to them a little bit about the book. But it's been a lot of fun. It gives me really a chance to meet. Look, I would never have met some wonderful person like you if it wasn't for the book and doing this speaking and consulting. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to meet you and speak with you and your audience. And the book allows me to do that. So that's been a lot of fun.
Thank you, sir. Well, like I said, we will post all of that information in the show notes. It is www.3 as in the number 3, then 60managementservices.com. 360managementservices.com. The 3 is numeric. The rest is alphabetical. So, listen, this has been a pleasure and honor. Thank you, sir. And for you, dear listener, remember to hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about the show, this episode or any past episodes. You can go to our Facebook page. Just look for Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty podcast to find out how you might hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or strategist for your organization. You can simply go to fullmontyleadership.com/consulting or fullmontyleadership.com/speaking. Now remember to be aware that the research consistently shows that the fastest growing companies face the same challenge, that they're spending a fortune on training and developing top talent, only to have them leave at an alarming rate. If you're sick of investing in the training and development of your talent, only have them leave before you get your ROI, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, because you can't outsource authenticity. Also remember to stop by the Matrix, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. You don't need a triple W, just matrix.fullmontyleadership.com, and get your Authentic Leadership Matrix self-assessment tool. It's valued at $197. It's yours absolutely free for being a valued listener, and you get to find out where your real strengths are in leadership. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everyone you know. Until next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about what it is you won't compromise. Remember to tighten those lug nuts. I'm Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.